Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kelly Goyer. I am Director of Field Services for Multi-Material Stewardship Western. It took me about 4.5 weeks of responding with that on the phone before I could get it all out without sounding like I was had cotton in my mouth. So it's a bit of a mouthful. But I'm here to review for you today our involvement in some of the overall strategy that these good folks from the ministry have spoken about. I'll begin with just filling you in on who Multi-Material Stewardship Western is. We are a not-for-profit organization, and we are formed to discharge the obligation that the printed paper and packaging industries have under the ministry's regulation, which was passed in 2013. That regulation made it so that the printed paper and packaging industries would need to either join a program or launch their own program that would allow them to pay up to 75% of net costs for municipal recycling of those printed paper and packaging materials. We are part of the Canadian Stewardship Services Alliance, a family of recycling organizations. So there's not only just Multi-Material Stewardship Western in Saskatchewan, but there's also Multi-Material BC in British Columbia, MMSM in Manitoba, Stewardship Ontario in Ontario. And what CSSA is really a national not-for-profit organization whose main focus is harmonizing the packaging and paper programs across the nation that they're involved in. So to give you an example, I work out of the Saskatoon office, and there's myself. Instead of running a staff of accounting and communications and outreach and all that kind of stuff out of the Saskatoon office, and duplicating that in other provinces as well, we're able to harmonize and provide services to our members at a much more efficient scale, such that my office is able to access resources out of the Toronto office, where CSSA is headed. So really what we're up to is what's called extended producer responsibility. And that was the intention also of the regulation, which was, again, stewards of packaging and paper are taking on a responsibility to pay for up to 75% of the net costs for recycling that packaging and paper materials. And again, stewards can either join an agency that's involved in discharging that obligation, or they can form their own. So really our value proposition to Saskatchewan businesses is that we represent very efficient measures of meeting those obligations in the regulation for stewards of paper and packaging. So we've already got teams of people who are involved in every aspect of providing that. And it's much more cost efficient and effective, we feel, for stewards to join an organization like us than it is to try and take on all of that complexity themselves. And as Sarah and Che-Wei also mentioned earlier about the duplication of efforts that we see in a lot of the landfill scenarios, our organization prevents a lot of that duplication of effort and keeps things very efficient and cost effective. So we are governed by a board of directors that includes representatives from some of Canada's largest national companies, most of whom will be the MMSW's largest paying stewards. So to give you some context, we're really looking at sort of a 90-10 scenario. So stewards, or otherwise you would know them as businesses who are involved in the generation or importation of printed paper or packaging in the province. 90% of the MMSW stewards that are paying into the program are operating at a national level somehow. So they're obligated in other provinces as well. And then there's another, roughly speaking, 10%, although I would argue it's probably lower than that, of very specific Saskatchewan-only businesses that would be obligated. The majority of businesses operating in Saskatchewan would be outside of the scope of this program. We're based on a collective model where every steward member signs the exact same membership agreement. So it doesn't matter if you are a Walmart or a Tim Hortons, very large, or whether you're just operating a number of different outlets through the province. you would sign the same agreement and your fees would be assessed at the same level. So some of you may have recalled we were set to launch in January of 2015, and we had some amendments come from the Ministry of Environment in mid-December. And so we've had to step back and redraft our plan so that we could meet some of the amendments that were released. So there was a permanent exemption for businesses between 2 and 5 million in revenue, or those that generate less than 1 ton of waste paper and packaging, or operate as a single retail store. There was a 2-year transition exemption given from reporting and paying fees, and with the exception of a $500 annual flat fee, and that was applied again to those businesses between 2 and 5 million. Pardon me, I think I just misspoke. The permanent exemption was for businesses less than 2 million. The temporary 2-year exemption was for businesses between 2 and 5 million in revenue, including all newspapers. And the ministry also wanted to be able to approve the stewardship fees for that period. So we needed to refine the scope of MMSW payments such that MMSW will work towards paying up to 75% of net costs for local governments and regional waste authorities. But we won't fund municipalities that are handling material that are not WPP as specified in the plan. Any WPP that is supplied by exempt or non-compliant stewards, so any stewards that are currently exempt or that have not come in and joined MMSW, we won't be paying for their share of material that comes into the streams. And of course, other packaging containers that have their own programs. So we're talking about oil, antifreeze, and that sort of thing. They've already got their own programs. So we launched on January 1st, and we are now in what's called a transition period. And that is that period where we are looking at that 2 to 5 million exemption is still in place. Once that requirement is expired, as well as the ministry's requirement to approve steward fees, we will move on to what's called post-transition phase 1, which will more closely resemble a fully built-out program, but what will be lacking is a definition of efficient and effective. So we're looking to the advisory committee formed under our program, which is sat on by SUMA, SARM, ARMAS, Saskatchewan Waste Reduction Council, as well as members from the stewardship community as well, to provide a definition of efficient and effective. So that's the language that we use in the regulation. Hence, that was the language that we used in our stewardship plan. But we're going to need the advisory committee to provide a definition to that before we can get to post-transition phase 2. Right now, we are in a per household payment model. And what that means is payments will be issued to local governments and regional waste authorities based on their total count of permanent residences, permanent households in their jurisdiction. Likely we'll use that methodology for post-transition phase 1 as well, as we still will be lacking a definition of efficient and effective. So the advisory committee, largely their role is to provide input and advice. They're really sort of the Saskatchewan perspective. We're looking to them to have an on-the-ground familiarity with programs in the province to provide input and advice on to our board of directors. And as I mentioned before, the advisory committee is sat on by SUMA, SARM, ARMAS, Saskatchewan Waste Reduction Council, as well as several seats from the stewardship side. We did have our first meeting January 19th and went quite well. And likely we will be meeting again in the fall to continue the work that the committee has already begun. So what does the program mean for Saskatchewan local governments and regional waste authorities? In this first phase of the launch, we'll be issuing payments to cover a portion of your costs to manage WPP material. And those payments will be on condition that a set of policies and procedures are met by the municipality or regional waste authority as specified in the services agreement that we enter into with each other. Our payments are distributed on a quarterly basis. So general rule of thumb, if you want to do some quick math, our fixed household payment is $11.75 per household. That's an annual amount. So multiply that by your total permanent households in your jurisdiction. That'll be your total payment amount. Divide that by 4. That's what you're looking at in quarterly installments. So the policies and procedures really speaks to quality assurance, quality control, right? We need to know that you are having the work performed, that it's being performed in a professional, safe manner, that residents are receiving access to WPP recycling programs. It doesn't matter at this point in time, it doesn't matter whether it's a curbside program, whether it's a depot program. Either one of those programs is certainly eligible. Also, the other point I want to make too is at this point in time, participation isn't so much a factor as access. So as we launch in 2016, what we're looking at is, are you providing access to your ratepayers to WPP recycling programs? And not so much how many of your ratepayers are accessing those programs. Obviously, we'd like to see high participation, but as we launch and we get the program started, it's about access to start with. The other major point I want to make is that in terms of reporting the performance of your program, that is a quarterly requirement, and we will need weigh scale tickets in order to do that. So in past years, projections, estimates may have been satisfactory for other organizations or entities that you may have been submitting that information to, but MMSW will require actual weigh scale ticket of some type to show the weights of material. And really what we're trying to do is satisfy the steward members that WPP, that they're recycling, that their packaging and paper is being recycled efficiently, but we need to satisfy the ministry that programs are making a positive impact on the amount of waste paper and packaging that previously was going to landfill that is now being recycled. So one of the other major changes, you may recall from last time when we were prepared to launch that there was somewhat of a deadline or a cutoff for joining. That is no longer the case. We did have a deadline of December 31st, 2015 to join, and that was really just to ensure that your quarterly payments begin to accrue at the beginning of the first quarter. So at January 1, your payments will begin to accrue. However, if you join at any other point, that's totally fine. Your payments will just be prorated based on when in the quarter that you joined. And that's let's call it a per month line in the sand. So if you join sometime in January, your payments will begin to accrue in February. If you join in February, your payments will begin to accrue in March, that sort of thing. Right, so where we are at now, now that we've launched, I just want to share with you, at the end of October, the ministry announced the approval of our stewardship plan. By the end of November, I had about 23 services agreements come in. By the end of December, I'd had 232 in total, representing 404 municipalities, either directly entering agreement with MMSW or via a regional waste authority. There are 12 regional waste authorities that have so far submitted services agreements to us. And overall, if you do just a basic calculation, if you look at the total number of households represented by these figures, and you factor in the $11.75 dollar amount, we're looking at $3.67 million in financing to local governments and regional waste authorities to help offset the costs of managing that waste paper and packaging. So I will end it there, and we'll open it up to some questions from the floor.
Thank you. Rob Mardell, Town of Choiceland. Bit of a personal question because I am a member of the oil recycling community. I own a business and I'm a collection point. Until recently, our enviro charges were taking care of the costs of our pickups. We were notified via email that as of the start of this year, we were going to be charged for our bags of oil containers that we've been paying and collecting an enviro fee on. And I just wondered if the ministry had a response to this.
Yeah, I wonder how long before this is going to come up. Yes, this has came out before, and what happened is that email does talk about the oil economy, oil price going down, so therefore the used oil become less valuable. We see that across the SARC, the used oil operator, is aware of this, and I'm not sure if you have an opportunity to have a chat with them.
Yes, I have.
Okay, so are they able to find you a different operator?
No, they aren't.
No? Okay. So for the short period of time, this might happen just because the oil price went down. From the SARC end, they did raise the return incentives, which is EnviroTech. They actually receive when they come and pick it up. So at the short term, I'm not sure if there's anything that the SARC can do about until the prices start to change and until the new contractor might be able to come into your area. So it is something that we are aware of it. And from the SARC's perspective, they have raised the return incentives. And the challenge is that we got to let the market some time to work it out. Because if you continue to raise the return incentive, it could actually, everyone else will pay more, and second, it might actually fix the problem. So,
If I could, one more question.
Quickly.
Sarah, this new policy now with the landfills and the fact that the landfills are being lined now and the product, the leachate water is being produced, what is being done to provide a route of handling this water now that it's being produced and handling it safely?
So I guess just a general comment to start, that there are no new regulations or requirements for landfills. The regulations have been in place since 1986. So it's simply a fact that there is more enforcement now of those regulations. So the requirement has always been to protect the groundwater and the aquifers. So lots of those ones that I spoke about are somewhat naturally aligned with clay, and they've never historically been dealing with that leachate. If you had a site like that sand example where the water was just leaching away, and so now you do line it and you have that leachate. So every site is going to be different. Some sites may choose to construct a surface water leachate pond where it's in a lined holding pond and it just simply evaporates. Some operations recycle back onto their cell and keep it as a loop. Some do truck it for disposal. And in some case, depending on the site, if they test and it meets surface water quality, then it could be released. So each site is going to be different based on their site-specific example and situation.
Okay, next question.
Dwayne Light, Town of Kipling. First of all, the conferences that Sarah referenced in November, I was at one of them, and they're worth going to. Got a lot of really good information about landfills, and the portion she spoke about what's going on in the States is quite astonishing. My question is in regards to seasonal residents and the MMSW. How are they being calculated?
Yeah, we've had this brought up by about a half dozen municipalities as we moved into launch. And right now what we're doing is we are calculating household payments based on permanent residences only. And what we've done is we've put the seasonal household issue in front of the advisory committee. So we wanted them to have we wanted to hear their perspective on what's a next step that they would suggest. And what they came back to us with was, we really want MMSW to dig into this and let's get clear on the scope of the issue. How many communities are we talking about? how many households potentially are we talking about? And then once we've got that data, we can then look at making a decision on that. It's a tricky issue. On the one hand, we're looking at potentially double paying for MMSW, paying households that have already paid in some other municipality, or in some cases, paying households that are owned by someone that doesn't even live in the province. So how do we work that out? On the other hand, these seasonal household owners are accessing services while they are in their cabins, right? The other piece is, how do we bring some clear metrics to for municipalities? How do we get clear on how many seasonal households are we talking about? How often are they occupied, and for what duration, right? So are folks coming to your municipality to stay in their seasonal home for 2 weeks out of the summer? Which 2 weeks? Or are they there for 3 months? Or how do we get a handle on that portion of the scope as well? So we're going to take 2016 to really look at the issue. Once municipalities begin to report their tonnage data on a quarterly basis, we'll be able to get some inside information on what those spikes look like. And then we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next. Maple Creek.
Barry Rudd, Maple Creek. I guess I got a few questions, if I can lump them sort of all into one here. With the multi-material and that the household count, do we get to include the rural municipalities too? Because the municipality people use our recycle facility. Now, there's only a couple of them that actually pay to use it, or they share the cost minutely. But do we get to include those in that count?
Yes, you can, provided that two things. Provided that you can show, you can provide some documentation that shows that there is a formal agreement in place of some sort for the sharing of that recycling program. And secondly, we would just need authorization from the RM that your municipality is free and clear to enter into an agreement with us on its behalf as well.
Okay, thank you, because there's, like I said, there's only a couple of the municipalities, but there's 3 or 4 that actually do use it. We don't turn it away, being a good corporate citizen with the cardboard and stuff.
Yeah.
Secondly, Sarcan does not take the milk jugs and whatnot anymore. We've taken it over with our paper project, and we're baling the milk jugs, but you can't find a market for them. And you know what, the weigh scale tickets, so I can understand, okay, if we sell a truckload, we can go through the elevator scale because we don't have scales, and you can get weight tickets. But some of the stuff that's been there and there's no market for it, milk jugs is being one of them. So we collect them when we bale them. We do nothing with them. We don't want to put them in the landfill because we're trying to preserve our landfill and not fill it up. Again, it creates another problem, and we have that material coming in from outside sources other than the residents of Maple Creek. And so is a weigh scale ticket from an elevator good enough? Or do you want to wait? Do you want to wait till every individual bale that's going or whatever? Do we have to put in a scale, I guess, is my question.
No, we've had other municipalities offer to access a grain elevator or a seed cleaning elevator for a scale, and that's fine by us. Yeah, as long as there's some sort of unique identifier that can be attached to that particular weight, right? So that as that weight goes through our system, if we need to come back and refer to that particular number and figure out what happened that day, was there a truck breakdown, or if the numbers have spiked or something, we just need an identifier of some type so that we can track that weight. But I do have other municipalities that are accessing grain elevators. That's not a problem.
Okay, and like you say, you make the payments quarterly or quarterly.
Quarterly, yep.
So I mean, sometimes we don't ship that often either. So I guess then, in a sense, we can assume that if we don't ship it, we've got it there waiting for the market to go up, especially with cardboard. We'll play the market, and or they do, the paper project, and we don't report. Like, are we going to get cut off or something because we didn't report last time and we saved the product? And because finding finding someplace to take the material is our biggest problem, as you know, everywhere.
Yeah.
Where do you get rid of it? Where do you get a price for it? I mean, we've been in the predicament before where we've had to pay to take the stuff out of the community.
Right.
Thank you.
So the reporting requirements, you'll find that in Appendix 1 of the services agreement. And it's quarterly, both tons collected, total tons collected, but also tons processed and or marketed. However, it makes total sense that because it's a shared responsibility program, MMSW is 75, municipalities 25% of the total costs. It remains up to you to manage and run your program how you see fit. So there's no requirement. You're not paid on tons reported. Reporting your tons marketed is a requirement, but if it turns out that quarter you didn't ship anything because you're waiting for number 2 plastic to go up, then you won't report any for that material that quarter. A household payment will come anyway as long as you're meeting your reporting requirements. But if it turns out that you didn't ship any that quarter, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Next question. Don't be shy.
Don Fornes from the Village of Neville. You will notice in the resolutions that we have something similar to this at the resolution floor when we get to our meeting. We understand the environmental rules, regulations. We've been to the meetings and we understand that. Come from a very small village which has almost no tax base. My question is, $200,000 may not mean much to a village or to a town the size of Assiniboia, but to a town with 80 people in it, $200,000 is financial impossibility. Is there, I know there's loopholes and such, we're not looking for that, but is there any sort of discussion on grants not based on population? Because an infrastructure grant based on population comes out to about $800. And that doesn't even pay the interest or the fees for noncompliance, or the fines for noncompliance.
Yeah, so I would caution on the fines of noncompliance because I would be more concerned. I mean, we could come out and issue a fine and then we could still have an impact and you could impact the health of residents, right? So let's not look at it from the fines, but the actual impact that it could cause. And when it comes to the grants, like Che-Wei said, we are working through that with our strategy. The grant sector does come from government relations. So right now there are grants that are offered through government relations. We've had some feedback that they do based on regional submissions. So that's why I've encouraged people when they're looking at moving to transferring their waste to a regional system, that they start to build that decommissioning in as part of those funding proposals. We have learned from Alberta, and so when Che-Wei said we've done the jurisdictional scan of other jurisdictions and we're trying to learn from other provinces' learnings, one of the things in Alberta is they put a lot of their grant programs onto the construction of new landfills, which they found artificially deflated the cost of waste disposal. And so they're now looking at funding either recycling or recovery operations and closure or decommissionings as opposed to the construction of net new. So residents would have to be aware and communities would have to be charging to properly construct that new, and they're looking at funding other initiatives instead of the construction of the new. So putting that all together, it will be something that's in the strategy, and right now those submissions and where the grant money is going is a discussion for government relations as they do hold that funding.
Second question, and maybe this is something for SUMA, and maybe I think that's the direction we're trying to get this resolution to go. We don't have, as a small community, we don't have access, other than your department, we don't have access to any information, i.e., if we've got to drill 4 test holes, how much does a test hole cost? Because what I got from the trade show last year is $25,000 a hole. $100,000 is a big chunk of change. For us, that's a chunk of land, or a chunk of money. But the question is this. Is there somewhere a directory of engineering companies who we can contact? Because when we talk to your environmental people, our contact there, he just says, get it done. But there's no indication as to who do we go to get an engineer to come out and say, here's what you have to do and here's how much it'll cost.
Yeah. So a couple of things there. We can't recommend one over another. So our usual answer is look for environmental consultants in the phone book, unfortunately. So I think SUMA would be the appropriate resource. I know back with the water and wastewater, they did put together some consulting firms that were doing that work. Again, I would look at that regional approach because so a lot of the cost in the drilling is the mobilization of the equipment. So if there's others looking to do the same work in the same area and you can get them to come out once rather than several times, that'll reduce your cost. As well, if it was last year or the year before, you were competing a cost with all the needs from the oil field for that equipment and services.
That's what they told us.
They're looking for work now.
Okay.
So my hunch is costs are coming down. So if you were to do it, you know the cost of today, they're coming down. So hopefully that'll be a benefit as well.
Okay. Quick question.
Yeah.
Low budget, short timeline or long timeline to pay it back. What's our first step? Drilling the holes?
Yeah, before you do anything, you need to know what you might not have an impact. So you need to have those holes drilled and the testing to know what your site is. Is it clay line? Does it have the aquifer there? Are there impacts? So that is your first step, is to understand what you have before you can put that plan in place. So step 1 is physical closure. Step 2 would be drilling and understanding your site. Step 3 would be that long term to address any impacts if they are there.
Okay.
One more question. Don't see anybody running. Oh, Stu?
Okay, Stu Severson from Corrobert. Basically, Sarah, so you're saying we better get some test holes drilled while they're still cheap. Like our
yes.
landfill isn't going to last forever. We're going in with this regional with Kindersley and so on. And should we be looking at possibly getting these done now? Because we're likely going to end up being a transfer station.
Yeah, so the holes for your site are going to serve multiple purposes. If you continue to operate, it's going to tell you what testing is needed to be done to continue to operate. If you're looking at closure, it's going to tell you if you have any impacts to close and that you have to remediate. So even if you're converting to a transfer station, you would need to understand if you've had any impacts to convert to that transfer station. So I would say, the sooner you do that, the better. It is going to be coming out as a permit requirement on all permits. So if it was missed on your permit or taken out, everyone will see it back in as a permit requirement unless a consultant signs off that they believe from a desktop study that your site is one that does not require groundwater monitoring, and the consultant signs off on that and submits it. That's the only way a site wouldn't require groundwater monitoring.
So we can't do this without a consultant.
Correct. But if you look at those costs, the consultant and the groundwater monitoring are still the minor portion of the cost to do work at your site. The main portion for closure is that cover material that prevents any further participation or precipitation from causing leachate at your site going forward.
I'm going to close the session, and I'd like to thank our speakers, and I'd appreciate if you join me in acknowledging that.